2, 1. Oh, here we are. Hello. Hey, what I tell you? Let's give it up for Regan. If the panelists would come up to the table here, we can get started with the discussion. There's a lot to talk about. I want to do brief introductions real quick. Folks can get into who they are, why they're here, a little more as we're doing the discussion, but I want to leave time to ask the right questions, get the answers, and have your questions as well. We're going to kick it off with Regan Brashear. Regan, congratulations. Let me tell you a little bit about Regan. Regan's the producer, director, editor of what you just saw. She's been working on labor, race, youth, LGBTQ, XYZ, and disability issues for over 20 years, now through documentary film, union organizing, community forums, grassroots activism, and even directing a teen theater troupe. She's now based out in Oakland and the founder of Making Change Media, which produces independent long-form documentaries, such as Fix, as well as short videos and for nonprofits and for labor unions. So I'm going to start it off with you, Regan. Decisions, right? That's a lot of what I think the film boils down to. What kind of decisions do we make? Why do we make them? What are the repercussions of those decisions? So my question for you is, why did you decide to call the film Fix?
Thank you for that question and introduction. And let me just say a quick thank you to ReelAbilities and to Ravit, and so many people that are in this room are actually a part of making this film happen. So actually my co-panelists are all in the film. If you haven't, you didn't see these guys, they're two of the dancers, and of course John Hockenberry. So thank you so much for participating. And Heidi Lezlie out there, she's a big part of helping that happen for dance footage. And there's actually 12 dance companies and performers represented in the film. And actually Alice Shepard's here too. Thank you. Thank you. What's really special is that the first time that some dancers from the film have been able to make it. So it's great.
I hated my lighting, by the way.
Oh,
talk about that.
Sorry. So you asked about the title, and really I feel like the title, it boils to me the essence of the film, which is this question of what are we fixing, you know, and I think that the film is trying to get at this idea of different ways to understand disability, and really this question of where is disability located? Is it in the body? Is it something that needs to be, you know, fixed? Or is it in society? Do we need to change the built environment or people's beliefs and perceptions, you know? And so to me it was sort of an interesting way to just sort of condense that. And then of course the subtitle is the science/fiction of human enhancement, and I'll never do a slash in it. It's kind of more of an academic title. But you know, that was sort of pointing at this relationship between science fiction and science, and you know, a lot of those, you know, little segments on the street were trying to get folks to, or you know, introduce that element of our imagination and that part that I think many of us can access of, like, wow, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And that it's a very rich territory there. But then to sort of turn that on its head and sort of look at, well, what's actually underneath this? And I think the film's trying to get at some of those core questions of, like, what is that, like you said, like the relationship between enhancement and ableism, or how we view disability, and what can we learn from that? And I sort of feel like how you view disability will then lead to different results. You'll have different answers come out of that. You know?
Depending on your perception, like where you come in from. Lezlie, let me be you. Now Lezlie, as you saw, is a dancer, fantastic dancer. She's a performance artist, a yoga teacher, a political educator based in Brooklyn, and she's committed to slowing down, making room, and holding space for all the communities and movements that she holds dear. She was a founding member of YIMP and was a collective member of Sins Invalid in San Francisco. She's currently a doctoral student in the American Studies program at the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis.
That's enough, Lawrence.
At your university. Just let it say where it was. Head of town. And so cultural
And she's
analysis.
a terrifying note taker, by the way.
I know.
Very intimidating.
And so cultural analysis. It's easy when you think about notions of transhumanism to, as the film shows, initially have sort of a rosy picture, right? An idealistic notion of what those things might be, what they might mean. But because I like to pop balloons a little bit, I'd like to ask you, one of the things that really struck out for me was one of the interviewees said, we have fewer short, ugly, fat, dumb people. What's the downside of that? What do we lose in the world if that were to occur?
Well, way to bring it home, Lawrence. We lose a lot of the people that are in this room, yeah. And a lot of the wisdom and intelligence and beauty and strength and power of our communities. I think when people say, who is the fella with the 1 month, every month he gets a new pair of legs?
Hugh Hurt.
Hugh Hurt?
Her, yeah.
Yeah, he said, I want freedom. That was like a language, and this language that you introduced our conversation was about making decisions, about making choices. And I think that's a really very compelling and seductive myth that we all have these choices to make, It's part of capitalism. It's part
Some
of,
people have choices.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it was mostly the folks of color in the film who were actually speaking about how those choices aren't really choices. Patty Byrne and Sujata in particular. And I think that when Hugh was saying that I want freedom, how I really read that statement is I want power. And I think that many of us want to experience power in the world because often that means access. That means access to healthcare or employment or education or relationships or all the other things we want in our lives. And how I really read that sort of politics of enhancement is through a politics of imperialism and expansionism. The idea of wanting more, wanting to expand, wanting power. And I think when we live in a society that distributes power according to norms or standards of bodily norms or deviance, then of course, no wonder that people want to access that power. Yeah, leave it at that.
John, 3-time Peabody Award winner, 4-time Emmy winner, Dateline NBC correspondent, a journalist for more than 2 decades. You're the anchor of the morning show The Takeaway here in New York on WNYC for Public Radio International. We were talking a little bit before the film. Some of these issues have been thorny. They've been things that people have been concerned about. What kind of world are we creating with the decisions that we're making, right? And I think one of the most salient issues that sort of centers around this that's been in the public consciousness for a number of years now, probably longer than most, is the issue of cochlear implants. Members of the deaf community, many members were concerned that if cochlear implants were adopted, that then these are technological advances that allow people to hear. That folks would lose, and this goes back to what I asked Lezlie, a culture that has developed around the syntax, the language, the community that the deaf community has evolved into and has developed on their own. What do you see in terms of the enhancements for society? You're a fellow there at MIT. What do we get by this? What do we gain?
Well, I think that part of the problem with this debate is that there are huge pieces of it that don't necessarily intersect in legal and ethical terms. I think the question of whether someone who has an experience that they want to change in some way using their engineering expertise or just their mind to conquer some sort of feature of their body that's manifested itself because of an accident mountaineering, in the case of Hugh Hurt at MIT, whether they have the freedom to actually do something about that they would like to enhance their own life. That's one question. The second question is whether the state is allowed to make broad choices or to encourage a set of broad choices and preferences that will have the net effect of reducing cultural diversity or placing sort of judgmental stigmas on aspects of existing culture. Those are just two elements of this debate that I don't think necessarily intersect. I'm very much an advocate for what Hugh Herr has done, who is not a terribly rich individual and who certainly espouses no imperialistic mission as far as I know, but on the basis of his own intelligence and his own absolute determination, invented those prosthetics that he uses. Now, his ideology about eradicating disability by making titanium prosthetics is absurd, and I think if you argue with Hugh on that, he will also agree that it's absurd. He doesn't necessarily want to eliminate disability, and I think part of the problem with Hugh's position is the statement in the film where he says, I deliberately designed these to be machine-like, because I want people to celebrate the beauty in the machine and acquire that as being human. I don't think that's any different from what Patty is saying when she says, I want us to appreciate the differences that we, people with disabilities, have. I want society to celebrate the fact that I have this disability as a quadriplegic. Hugh wants society to celebrate these prosthetic limbs. So I think in some ways they're saying the same thing. Now the question of, what is the state permitted to do? And whether technology on its face enforces a certain set of broad cultural preferences. The cochlear implant debate is interesting in that when cochlear implant technology emerged on the scene, the original test cases of cochlear implant technology, particularly in the legal community, in lawsuits and on the advocacy side, were when two deaf parents had a child that was, or two deaf parents had a child that could hear, or two deaf parents had a child that was deaf, and that someone within the family advocated for that child to get a cochlear implant, and the deaf parents resisted, saying that no, it's our choice, we don't want our child to have that, and that was viewed as some sort of abuse of the child. And of course, the social norm is that the child would want to have a cochlear implant, and in fact the state has an interest in that child getting a cochlear implant. And the issue was, well no, that delegitimizes deaf culture and says somehow the deaf culture is illegitimate on some level and is a scourge, and it's in fact something that the cochlear implant is designed to eradicate. That was a very passionate, very legitimate, very important debate, but it related to only a very specific set of unique cases. What has actually happened as the cochlear implant has proliferated is that in fact there's become a coexistence within the deaf community and within people who use the cochlear implant of the fact that this technology exists. And you have people who are deaf, who get a cochlear implant and remain in the deaf community culturally. There are many arguments that continue to go on within the deaf community about cochlear implants, but the way in which that technology has penetrated the culture of both the deaf and the hearing community has been surprising. The fact that it has not been regulated by the government, I think, has been a good thing. The positive message there, the good news, if you want to say, I hate that good news, the good news. We never know what the good news is, and I'm in the news business, right? When do I talk about good news? But the positive message is, I think, that we have the capacity as humans, because of this adaptability trait that is so important to us, I think, to adopt these kinds of technologies, these emerging tools, in a way that is fundamentally humane. And we don't now live in a world where cochlear implants are forced upon people. And that is understood to be a core value. We would not do that. We don't view that as something that must be done, even though that initial debate suggested that that might be the way that we're going. And I think that cochlear implant example suggests that a lot of the technologies that Hugh is talking about, perhaps the brain implant technology that also is being done at research at Carnegie Mellon and Duke, some of which was in the film, suggests that we're going to be able to handle this ethically. And the transhumanist idea that, you know, we're going to have fewer, you know, fat, smart, I wish that it also had said annoying too, because that would get rid of him. You know, that gets you Germany 1939. You know, there is a lot wrong with that model to get rid of the fat, the dumb, and the unattractive people. I mean, that's been tried. We did that in the 20th century. I don't think we necessarily are inclined to go down that road again, although I will say, you know, humans have a pretty dismal track record in terms of getting technology right on the first crack. So we're going to learn some important lessons here, but that's not to say that we shouldn't embrace the changes that are afoot.
And thank you. So the lessons, right? One of the sort of reoccurring themes that I think was crystallized at the end was these new technologies, this brave new world, if you will, is upon us whether we like it or not. These things are occurring, they're being developed, people are adopting them, utilizing them. We are seeing the end of normal, if you will. Or maybe we're seeing a new normal, right? Which is one of those sort of phrases I see in the media a lot in terms of disability. The new normal is the new normal here. Soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, adapting to their new environments and their new bodies in ways that they never envisioned before. Seniors, you know, with hearing aids or hip replacements, knee replacements, right, that are now doing things that might not have been possible 10 or 15 years ago. This new normal, the idealized version, says that we get more options, we get more flexibility, right? What do you see? If you look down, you've made this film now, and it's been how many years? Were you working?
When we started it?
Yeah.
It's been 8 years.
8 years. So in the 8 years since you started this film, you took the time you needed. This is fantastic. What were you expecting? I'm curious to know with this new normal idea. What were you expecting when you started the film? How were you surprised?
How was I surprised by
What things that came out of the making of the film, discussions, conversations, maybe even technologies that occurred within the making of it that you could not have seen, you didn't see going on? And maybe reactions. Maybe it's the reactions.
I mean, I think what I learned from the people that I met through the making of this.
What did you expect?
What did I expect? That's a good question. Like, expect in terms of
The reaction. In making it, what were the plans
reaction
going
to
in?
the film.
Yeah, what were your plans going in? Why were you making it? Again.
You were a good researcher. You had a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I really, the original inspiration was from meeting Gregor Walbring and hearing him talk about this idea of the relationship between enhancement and legalism and his view, and that sort of set me on this journey to be like, okay, yeah, what is this? And because, you know, I originally, well, here, I mean, I honestly, like, began with, you know, hearing him talk about, you know, plans, you know, going to this NSF-sponsored conference on improving human performance through converging technologies, and having conversations about how do we bioengineer a more productive workforce, or a cyborg soldier, or, you know, these ideas of how can we use technology to stay competitive and stay ahead, and that really freaked me out, okay? That was definitely like, what are we doing? You know, I was working as a union organizer at this point, and thinking about going back, or going into film, and that, it just, you know, it sounded like eugenics, it sounded like a lot of things. And so I definitely began, like I was saying the other day, like it began with a lot of fear and worry, and honestly, it's been a real journey of opening up and challenging my own beliefs, and having to wrestle with, you know, Hugh, her, and very different beliefs about these technologies, and really being, basically my point with the film is to present a series of questions that I honestly have. I don't have answers, you know what I mean? And so So I think what's been a relief is that I think that has worked, that people are just presenting questions that, and bringing people into conversation that aren't often in conversation, with each other. And so sorry, I'm not answering the specific question though. I think one thing that was interesting is just feeling like everybody in the film, I think, wants people to think differently about disability and also this idea of normal. And I think throwing the idea of normal out the window, but from that point forward, you've got really different ideas on sort of how we should view it, what it's going to mean to move forward and to create the world that we want to live in. And I think, Sylvia Yu's question at the end is really, I think gets to the heart of it. It's like, we have lots of different perspectives, but what kind of world do we want to live in? How do we get there? And,
And so we even ask ourselves that question, right? Are we on the train without knowing that destination that I'm asking? Sort of where it's headed.
Yeah. I feel like where I want to talk about is like I don't fear that the government's going to enforce that we start adapting new technologies. What I worry about, and just through the making of this, that just is with me, is how it shapes the culture. And it's not like a hard top-down kind of thing. It's like it's in the air. It's in everywhere you go. There's a pressure to adapt and.
Well, eugenics was a movement that grew out of a cultural acceptance of deselection that then the government decided to fund, and then in certain states actually enforced through sterilization. So I think they're not unrelated. It's not, and the government's action, the state's perceived interest in this doesn't come out of nowhere. It does in some instances, but in the United States, typically what happens is that there's a movement that produces a set of legislation that then has the effect of enforcing a certain set of cultural preferences. And I think we've made an enormous number of mistakes in America on that score. I would say though that on the basis of the evidence of the marketplace, and I'm not a big fan of capitalism per se, but I will say that there's not a lot of evidence that the proliferation of technologies to allow people to choose various attributes is going to result in conformism. If you look at the way the fashion industry has proliferated, as wretched and odious as the glitz of the fashion industry may be, it maintains a level of diversity, at least in ornamentation, if not body type, if you look at models. But certainly the fashion industry itself has not enforced a standard of body type on Americans. They may feel guilty if they're overweight or underweight, but there's a profound diversity in the way people look in America. And I think what typically happens is people want to ornament themselves and create a sort of distinctive look for themselves. And I think that's what they pursue. Now, there may be various sorts of judgments and guilts associated with people wearing the wrong tie or being overweight on some level, and Oprah talks about this endlessly. I think all that debate is fine, but I think there's not a lot of evidence that the technology itself defaults to everyone being the same and erasing a sense of diversity. I don't think that's. I don't think.
Could a case not be made though? That not everyone's going to be able to afford Vera Wang, right? That's that the fashion industry caters to a certain upper class kind of.
No, the fashion industry is at JCPenney's. The fashion industry is at Loehmann's. The fashion industry is at. The fashion industry is at all price points.
Right. But if we look at the history, to use your own example, so the history of eugenics, right? The 20s developed Long Island, not too far from here. A lot of it, the Nazis liked it so much they imported it, right? That's kind of the history of how a lot of it came down. And so certain people have options, certain people don't have options, certain people have more options, and those without those options, the common tendency has been to crave what the haves have. you're told you need to have what the haves have, and that's the thing that gets reinforced over and over and over again. So, Lezlie, I saw you writing furiously during the course of some of this conversation. What's going through your mind?
I think I'd like to underline Patty Burns' commentary about the concerns of disabled people of color in her life, about basic needs, for personal assistance, for housing, and let alone education, and other things, relationships, the other things that she mentioned. And that I think this idea of internalizing judgment, or the debate over like what kinds of judgment people interpret over fashion, or what kinds of images you see on TV and movies, that this is no small thing, that actually the myth that we have choices, this is part of living in a capitalist society, right? That our power is to be able to choose, what we buy or how we dress, or and that actually, we don't actually have those choices. We don't have the kinds of choices to live the same quality of life. So for example, if Hugh, what's his last name? If Hugh can choose to sort of update his legs every month, I'm really devastated thinking about Lisa Bufano, actually, who couldn't update her legs every month.
The film is one of the people the film is
dedicated to, and who many of us in this room, know and love deeply, who took her life in October of this year. And I want to say that those judgments, they lie deep, right? They fall deep. That it's not simply a choice, right? That there's not like the same sort of freedoms that we all access, right? That our capacity to move through this world is not simply just about it's structural, and it's also internal. And I think that ableism is not some sort of abstract thing that yes, we can all internalize these judgments that our bodies aren't okay, or they don't meet some sort of norm, but they, we're dying from this. And I wish that I had been, our communities are dying. And I wish that I had been there when you had asked, what would you want if you could have a superpower? Because what I would say, Regan, is I want the superpower to love myself exactly as I am. And I want that.
Why don't you have that already?
Well, let me finish. I want that for Lisa Bufano. I want that for all the other disabled people who have lost their lives and who have taken their lives. And I think that the reason that I don't have that is because I live in a society that teaches me that I'm not worthy and that my body is not enough. And I think that that's not something that I made up, right? That's something that's shared. It's something that's collective. And I really think that this is something that we need to take seriously. This is part of the process. This is part of the currency. And I think that we actually don't live in a world that's the end of normal. We live in a world that is very obsessed with the anxious repetition of the necessity for normality. And that's not just a message we get, it's something that we internalize, it's something that's killing our communities.
But that's exactly what's in play right now. How does the Hugh Hers experimenting with different kinds of legs increase the pain of the death of Lisa Bufano? I don't understand how they're related.
This is what happens when those of our community who are most privileged amongst disabled people get access to more, right? That doesn't actually do anything for the large number of disabled people who don't have access to that. No, it's not that he shouldn't do that, actually. It's that we shouldn't rise it up on this stage. I think that he's actually saying something very different than Patty Byrne, because Patty Byrne is invested in a downward distribution of resources for the most marginalized of all disabled people, whereas she's not just a celebration of disability symbolically. She has no need for that. That doesn't do anything.
Why can't those exist simultaneously?
They can exist simultaneously. We just need to acknowledge the privilege involved here and the elitism involved in being able to access these things. The vast majority of people who are disabled by war, by environmental racism, by poverty, by all the things that are also produce disability are not being recognized in this conversation.
So people with disabilities at every level use assistive technology of one kind or another. They adapt with various kinds of tools. Well, Patty Byrne has a wheelchair, and Patty Byrne also adapts her wheelchair, as you can see in the film. She and the paraplegic who was with her, who rode her chair in the last shot of the film, is also adapting to technological solutions. That I think what they're doing is no different from what Hugh Herr is doing. I think the idea that society then insists that everyone has to have Hugh Herr's legs, that's the leap I don't quite understand.
Oh, I don't know that that's the leap. I think the leap is that getting the legs is what one is expected to have, and that there is not a lot of space, not the same amount of space for those who would say, screw that, I'm going to crawl. I think that's more what Leslie's talking about. I don't want to speak for you, but I think
but who's judging the people who say, screw that, I'm going to crawl? I mean, who's judging Gregor?
Everyone.
I think it's.
But in what sense? How does that manifest? Gregor is a successful biochemist who, first of all, was born with his disability, so he has no biological or memory of the idea of a full functioning body, which is an important experience that he doesn't have, which I think shapes his orientation in a significant way. And I think that's totally fine, and I accept his orientation. I think it's absolutely compelling that he suggests that his variation, his biological variation, his mutation, his birth defect, as someone would say, it makes him superior. I think that's a perfectly good way of looking at it.
He actually says that what makes him superior is that he has a brain, actually. That's what he defines.
I think this brain business is crap, though, and Hugh Herr is just as much full of shit about it as well. The idea that you are what is between your ears, no. In fact, you are the embodiment of your physical being and your mental being, and they work together in an integral way that cannot be separated.
And in complex, myriad...
I am the embodiment. I am not only the embodiment of what my existence was for 19 years as a walking person. I am mentally the embodiment of the physical experience of being in a wheelchair for 38 years. And there's no way to separate it. There's no way to say the ideas in my brain are some undisabled kind of angelic fiction, and that everything that has to do with my body is some annoying kind of manifestation of our physical existence. No, this kind of duality crap is exactly the way that we get into trouble with things like eugenics, with things like, oh, we must not, we adopt some sort of annoyingly ideological view that prevents us from solving problems. The idea here is that humans are adaptable. Humans are tool users. Humans have the impulse to reorganize and refashion their existence to make their physical lives easier, more desirable, more to their liking, more artistic, more beautiful, whatever it is. Patty has a great fashion sense, clearly. Patty has, clearly thought a lot about every aspect of the rooms in her house. In many ways, that's no different from what Hugh is doing. Hugh understands very clearly that he's not for everybody, and he's a mountaineer, for God's sakes. You don't want a mountaineer's view of the world, a narrow-minded mountaineer's view of the world to be your social policy, but Hugh should do what he does. I think the technologies that are being explored in the film are exciting and interesting, but there's no one way to apply them. And the only guy who wants to do it, generally, the transhumanist, is the one person who sounds like a complete wacko in the film. And I think that's absolutely right.
The person who has the most, the person who has the most privilege. Maybe those are the voices that get heard, actually.
Well, if you want to talk about the healthcare system and how unequally the resources for healthcare are.
After this point, because I want to make sure they get their questions. But
I mean, that's a really legitimate question, but it's certainly not confined to the question of disability.
Make the point again, because I walked over.
The idea of disparities of resources in healthcare, do people who are rich get more in terms of healthcare than people who are poor? I think it's very, very clear that that disparity exists. It's not something that has specifically to do with disability.
Right, there are questions, I think, of allocation of resources, what makes the most sense to do, who gets what. If an exoskeleton costs $25,000, for example, I must admit, there's part of me that's sort of blown away by the whiz-bang kind of technology of it. And there's another part of me that says, wait a minute, how many ramps could we build with that, right? It's sort of that same, you know, what's the economic cost? Who's not getting access because one person's walking?
But why does that come out of the exoskeleton budget? Why doesn't that come out of the Super Bowl budget?
Right.
Like, that's
And
the one thing that kind of seems to say is absolutely right.
That's a very important question. And in thinking about, you know, the last thing that I think the film wraps up with, which I thought was a really salient point, was about being better than well, right? What is better than well? What does that look like? What does it mean, right? And it's interesting because you can say, it's the bionic man or the bionic woman, you know, you run better, stronger, faster, we can create them. That's one notion. Although, you know, I turn on the takeaway or I open up the New York Times and I'll also hear, you know, people are tired, they're exhausted, they're tuned in, they're plugged in all the time. Sometimes better than well means turning off the phone. It means, you know, going to the lake. It means talking with your friends. It means, you know, doing some of those human interaction things. And in terms of human interaction, we're going to go to you. How'd you like that segue?
Very nice. You saved your ass, though.
Yeah,
I had no idea where that was going.
All right, so first question. Please just give us your name and go for it.
Hi, my name is Trina Rose. Thank you so much for this film. I'm quite stimulated at the moment. I think, you know, with the questions that are emerging right now, or the, you know, kind of philosophizing, I just wanted to bring to the conversation the notion that the idea of the individual is really a 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st century concept, the self-contained, self-sustaining, self-sufficient, rational individual. And it's really, you know, part of the production of both disableism and ableism, if we want to see those differently, which I'm not going to get into right now. But I just wanted to, I know it seems that this transhuman movement seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to come out of the private sector. I don't know, I hear a lot of laughter.
Is that a yes, no, kind of what you're wondering? Put that into a question, if you will.
Okay, my question is, in some disability studies circles, we see a difference between impairment and disability, and although those are problematic to kind of separate because they kind of inform each other, the way I understand impairment is about the body and the capabilities that one has within the body in their relationship with the body, whereas disability is kind of this thing that is produced in our culture that disables. And I was just wondering, one, why that might have not been explored a little bit more in the film. And also I feel like the question might be about like what we value and why we value that. Because I think that options is mediated by access. And I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Those are great points. I'm not certain I got the question part, but like why wasn't the common good versus the individual sort of that piece explored more? Or is that sort of your
Yeah, or maybe just
impairment versus
comments
disability?
to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there was an attempt, and maybe I didn't, you know, get there, but of sort of trying to lay out sort of the difference between a social model of disability versus a medical model, but without getting into like a ABC of it, like just sort of integrating it into the film. So that is definitely a distinction that Gregor makes, right, when he's talking about, you know, variation is not an impairment, you know, but it's not, it's certainly not front and center, so I think that's a great point.
One of the questions that he sort of asked rhetorically is when you say, are you disabled? He said, what definition are you using?
Yeah.
His definition, maybe more the social model, was very different than Hugh's, which was very clearly
Right,
medical model.
because someone cut Hugh's legs off. He was walking around, then he was in a mountaineering accident, his legs froze, they got gangrene, he sat in a bed for 3 months, and then they cut them off. It would be natural to assume that that experience constitutes an impairment, at least for the first couple of hours. Then you get to the point where you're thinking more in terms of Gregor, who arrived at his notion of variation the first moment he learned to talk. They're just two fundamentally different experiences.
No, and that's exactly
He's
what I was
identified as
trying to point out.
able-bodied. You know, Hugh is identified as able-bodied, Gregor is not.
He was not identified as able-bodied. He's got 2 stumps.
He remains very invested in that.
But he says in the film, I'm not disabled, I'm not crippled.
Yeah.
He makes a very strident proclamation that he doesn't consider himself disabled. It's there in the film.
For very different reasons. Gregor says the same thing.
And I want to be
Hugh,
clear.
Hugh makes an important distinction between Hugh lacks the functionality that he wants when his prosthetics are not with him. But if you've ever been around Hugh, he does not cease to exist if you take those prosthetics away from him. If you're out and about with him, he takes them off and he wanders about, and he's just as open with his stumps as he is with his prosthetics. He's very much a disabled man who is integrated with his idea of what his body is right now. Now, I guarantee you, he does not, sleep with someone with his prostheses on. He's very proud of the fact that his prostheses allow him to walk, but when he doesn't need them for that, then his body is something
Yeah, but I
else.
don't think anybody was suggesting that that was something he was
But
doing.
I think you misconstrue the idea. He is crippled. You take his prosthetics away from him, he's crippled. That's what he said in
Right.
there. One should not extrapolate from that to mean that he only considers himself a human or normal or at the state that he wants to be in when he is with his prosthetics on, and I don't think that's the case.
Right, and I don't think anybody, at least I'm not professing that's what he's saying. I'm
But I don't
saying,
think he's buying into some, I'm not good enough unless
No.
I have my legs.
again, I don't think it's a value judgment. I think it's, I don't want to get too much into semantics, but the medical model of disability, it frames disability as something that is wrong, something that needs to be cured or healed or fixed, to use a word. And he's clearly living sort of within that universe, is simply what I'm saying. I'm not making a value judgment on
I
that.
strongly disagree. I think that
Well-
any more than why am I sitting in a wheelchair? Because I want to be fixed? No, because I want to move around.
No, but again, there's the way you think about it, and there's the way you live your life. So there's different variations.
But I don't
That's
understand the way you live your
spelled out.
life versus the way you think about it.
Well, we can talk about it afterwards.
I don't understand.
I want to make sure that other people, Lorene.
Hello, so my name is Lorene Arbus. A little commercial, come see my film, A Whole Lot More, on Monday night. We have a panel at 5:30, the film at 6:30, and a reception after. Thank you. So, Trini, I thought your comments, we just met tonight, but I know your sister, were wonderful and really right on. Forgive me, I did not catch I thought your film was beyond amazing, but the woman who's a dancer, what's your first name?
Leslie.
Sorry?
Leslie.
Leslie, I'm so sorry, I didn't catch it. So, Leslie, and everyone, my older sister sat in a wheelchair, and she was defined by her disability. She couldn't see, she couldn't talk, she couldn't walk, she made strange sounds, she had a zillion different complications. Primarily, she was diagnosed as someone with cerebral palsy, but she was blind, she was aphakic, she was many, many, many things. She was a disabled person, and very few people came near her. She was someone people were afraid of, and she was there. And the rest of us lived in that world of disenfranchisement because of that. I'm sitting here this evening, and I'm looking at you, listening to you, fascinated with what you have to say. I'm a dancer, I'm loving what you've accomplished and what you do, and I'm listening to everyone. I have no idea if you have a disability or not. And only at one point in your comments, way into the program, did I happen to notice that you have an arm that is not the same as your other arm. You're not a disabled person to me. You are a person. My question is, Why don't we ever stop over, linger over, question the fact that everyone in the film, almost everyone, and quite honestly in mine as well, call themselves disabled people. You are a dancer, you are a brilliant person, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, who happens to have a disability. You are not a disabled person.
Okay, I think I get the
in my
question. I
perception.
think I got it.
So Lezlie, is it an option for you?
I mean, I think it could be, certainly. You know, if I were invested in passing as able-bodied, I find it very interesting to claim my abilities and my capacities and my wisdom and my strength and my, capacity to dance or capacity to move or think or whatever. I think because I'm exposed to a politics of disability, because I'm exposed to disability communities, because I'm surrounded by people who use ventilators, who are cognitively disabled, psychologically and psychiatrically disabled, people who have sensory disabilities, people, because that is my community, because that is my family, I have come to identify with that community. So it's become very important to me to identify as a person with disability, to identify as disabled, not because I think that disabled means that I'm not brilliant, or I can't dance, or I can't do things, but because I've been exposed to a community of people who believe that disability doesn't mean those things, yeah? It's a marker, it's a signifier for a certain kind of community, the same way that when I identify as queer, I'm not actually saying that I'm bad or I'm sexually perverted, right? I'm actually saying I'm identified with a politic of anti-assimilationism or anti-normativity, right? That I'm identified with a community of people who have a certain sort of politic around sexuality, right? So that I think that for many of us, we're not exposed to thinking about disability as something that has any sort of positivity. And the first moment I was exposed to this was when I read an article by Harriet McBride Johnson in the New York Times Magazine a few years ago, where she said, being disabled does not necessarily mean, many of us wouldn't choose lives with disability. Does that mean that you should pity us? No, she says, don't pity us. We choose lives that we live in lives that we wouldn't necessarily choose, but we create rich and satisfying lives within those conditions. And, we have many of the same struggles that, and pleasures that able-bodied people do, that any non-disabled person does. We also have many struggles and pleasures and skills and beautiful things about being disabled that others don't, that are unique to us. And I think that's what I mean when I say I'm disabled.
We got a question back here. We're going to take 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Beth Bienvenu. I'm with the National Network for the Arts, and I'm going to let my stutter fly because I stutter and I'm not going to avoid it.
Yay.
Yeah. But my question is, number one, I love the film. I loved your incorporation of dance. It's so important. And as an arts person, I think it's wonderful, and I love seeing all of our friends. Can I get people to raise their hands who danced in the film? I just want to make sure we're all recognized. Wonderful. I want to get back to something that you touched on earlier in the film, but you evolved past it. You evolved past the superficiality of appearance, and how we, at the same time that we have so much diversity that's out there with disability, with veterans coming back, and the wonderful prosthetics and all the interesting things going on in the Paralympics, and unfortunately Oscar Pistorius until recently. It's out there and it's wonderful, but at the same time, appearance is still so homogenized, and John, you were talking about how much diversity there is in fashion, but the bodies that we see are so uniform and thin, and
In the media.
White
You see
and
it
white.
in the media, yes.
Right, I think
And the photoshopping is out of control, and the celebrities that are being photoshopped like crazy, and even at the Oscars, their bodies are not their own because there's duct tape and extensions and everything.
Look, I've been in the media for 30 years. Why is the media such a marker for cultural conformity? Why is that? Why is that persuasive to you? I don't understand. But the media doesn't determine what America is. I mean, I think...
Like hegemony, or the idea that, people don't actually have individual choices to consent to everything, but they actually...
What does that mean exactly? The idea that because Christina Aguilera is on American Idol, that means that the variations in this room are some kind of disability?
It means that if there's like, 100,000,000 Christina Aguileras over and over and over again, right? What do we internalize about what worthy bodies are? This actually becomes the basis for how civil and human rights are determined.
But it's not as though people don't. I've been in the disability community for 40 years. There is nothing about the sense of conformity that you're talking about, and I find it just as odious as you do, that prevents me from living the life the way that I want to.
But can you open to the possibility that so many other people's lives are prevented because of that? Are you open to that possibility?
Right. Well, the idea that any of the technology that we're talking about here, or any of the aspirations to make our lives better or to adapt with the tools that this film is about, the idea that is negated by the fact that we have in America this well-known capitalistic kind of extolling of the celebrities and the hot-looking white actors and actresses, I think it just belies what's actually going on in America. People don't live their lives like Tom Cruise. People don't live their lives like Christina Aguilera. People live their lives, and I think my experience with the disability community is celebrating precisely that diversity. I say that I'm disabled because I'm proud of being a part of that culture. I am proud of being an adaptable human who has taken my experience, completely owned it, and nobody has the power and no message that people in wheelchairs are going to be pitied. And by the way, McBride was one of the proudest individuals who ever walked the face of this earth. She did not... What?
Or rolled the face.
Or rolled the face. I mean, she at no point allowed this prevailing notion of fashion or conformity or beauty to in any way pass a judgment.
But you can't say that internalized ableism did not impact her, or internalized racism, internalized sexism. Those things still affected her. She didn't exist outside her culture.
Can I just jump in for just one second? This is great. I mean, this is why we made the film, right? It's to stimulate debates like this, because clearly there's really different perspectives out there, right? And so one thing I want to just raise up is that I feel like the issue with prenatal screening around Down syndrome, for instance, that you could say we all have freedom, we can use these technologies or not, but it's like the truth is that people are using them, and the pressure, the social pressure is not
95%.
Or this is a population of people that are shrinking because of the social pressure to conform, and that is based on. There's no way to negate that those are based on very clear value judgments of what's better, what's good, what's bad. And it's not.
Although a woman's right to choose not to carry a pregnancy to term, and a woman's right to choose not to have a baby with Downs intersect. They are not. You can't have one without the other. And I consider personally the deselection of Downs to be an atrocity. But you cannot have both if your value set in the societies is to allow women of childbearing age to make that choice.
But you could have complexity. You could have like an anti-ableist, you could have a disability positive politic and a feminist politic coexisting.
That's a theoretical issue. The question is if you're allowed to choose whether or not to carry a pregnancy to term, the idea that you are not allowed to choose because it's Downs is not something you can write a law for.
Right, and that's not what I was trying to get at. What I was trying to get at is that there's I'm moving my train of thought here.
There's like wait, and you could have the silence, and then you can speak.
Basically, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that it's back to, I think, Trina's point around the individual and the collective good. It's like, if we're going to stay focused in the current values and the current trajectory, it's going to just be, of course, people are going to use the technologies, but if we work towards creating a world like Sujata's talking about, where we are valuing disability, we're not seeing it as a bad thing, we're creating some social supports we're funding those programs way more than we are the research for the high-tech enhancements. We're going low-tech, like it's going to be such a different world for that woman to make that decision in than the world we have today. And that's what just worries me, because I don't see that changing unless we have serious discussions and serious,
Well, I mean, it should be stated, though, that a lot more is spent on entitlement programs for people with disabilities now than is spent on research in these technologies that you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about aggregate spending.
Welfare, though, and disability, like government funding.
Welfare is a huge investment
Right,
compared to investment in
and I think it's fair to say also that it's constantly under attack also. I mean, it's something that is sort of the first thing that is gone after in terms of living in Washington, D.C., it's the easy target in terms of what you can cut. And ultimately, I think that brings us back around to sort of the beginning, because unfortunately I have to wrap this up now. And that is, what do we value? Right? What do we value? What kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of people do we want to be? What kind of diversity do we want to see and engage with? Not just know that it's out there, but actually interact with, have as part of our lives, our daily existence, right? Does disability put the D in diversity? Is it really there at the front of the word? Or is it an afterthought? Right? That's the kind of question that I think we need to be asking ourselves. And if you value diversity, if you value these kinds of conversations, if you value having the space to actually unpack this a little bit for more than 10 seconds at a time, I really encourage you to get back here as much as you can this weekend, because
If you value car talk,
but I'm serious about this, because these kind of events, this kind of festival, isn't going to exist if you don't show up. It's not. They're not going to have the money to do it. They're not going to have the people to do it. I know. I ran a film series for 4 years. If you like this kind, and it does sound kind of like an NPR pitch, but that's not going to you'll get your coffee month. No, okay.
out here, someone want to raise their hand for a big. All right, we got a donation.
And if you want to see more of this, you want to do more of this, you want to have more of this, support film festivals, support conversations, support people coming together to discuss these sort of things. That's what I'm going to say. Support ReelAbilities.
I want to thank our panelists here. And a big thank you to the wonderful Lawrence Carter-Long. And yes, I agree. These conversations deserve to be served now if there are any cookies left. But we wanted you to continue these conversations both here in the halls, on the street, after every film. Tomorrow we have here at the JCC a whole day of great events. Actually, they've designed our free events on Saturday specifically for everyone to be able to attend, and dealing with topics relating to disability, from sign language classes to amazing films. We start off the day with actually short films, which sometimes people are like, short films, but they're perfect for me with my short attention
See the
span.
short films.
The short films. Lawrence, you're back for that one, right?
Yeah.
And every year, they are amazing because, first of all, these films are made with smaller budgets, and they really have something to say, and this is the way for them to get out there. So check those out. Cinemability in the afternoon is basically the continuation of this conversation and how disability is affected in the media, and how it's represented in the media, and many, many more films and events. Check out the whole brochure. Simi, I would tell people to come to Invitation to Dance, but if you don't have tickets already, you're not getting there. Where is Fix going to be seen next?
Tomorrow at 4:30 and the Hunter?
School of Social Work.
What? The School of Social Work at Hunter College.
121st Street and 119th Street and I was there.
119th Street and 3rd Avenue tomorrow at 4:30.
And
You're
then 1
better. I love
o'clock in
it.
Brooklyn on Sunday.
Folks, thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Enjoy dessert.